This is from the author of Mushoku Tensei. And when I found that out, I was morbidly curious. I had to know for myself if this was actually a good read or not. Because when I found out, you can even see his name at the top here. When I found out he wrote this story, I was like, what? He has another story besides Mushoku Tensei that he has written. And upon investigation, I found out that he has a light novel version and a manga version. And the artwork for the series, the manga version in general, is being done by a very well-known manga artist. And when I found that out, I was just like, yo, are you kidding me? Because there was a lot of people that recognized this artwork just from this character expression alone, without even knowing what the story is. They recognize the artist, and I think that says a lot about the individual than anything else. But, jokes aside, I decided to sit down and give Orc Eroica? I think it's Orc Eroica. Forgive me if I mispronounce it. But, I sat down, I read it, and honestly, it is basically a bootleg Berserk. There's differences, obviously, but it is a bootleg Berserk, at least in terms of designs, or at least the beginning portions of it. There's a lot of heavy-handed nods to that, which is completely fine, to be fair. I mean, a lot of dark fantasy and fantasy stories take away from Berserk Kintaro's writing, so, to see, someone like, Mushoku Tensei's author, being inspired by, Berserk to some degree, is not really out of the realm of being too far-fetched. So, I think that's completely fine. But if you take a look here at this cover and you look at, like, the person in the background here, it's just like, it's not even trying to hide the fact that it's literally an orc version of Guts. Like, the hair design is the exact same, you have the scars on the face, you have the great sword and all that. It is almost identical. You even see a fairy here, which is pretty much like Puck from, Berserk. So it's just like, yeah, the author and the artist were not really trying to hide what they were implying with this overall beginning, which, I think it's fine. Being this outright shameless with some things, I think is completely fine, and I think that it does add a little bit of character and a little bit of respect, because sometimes, an artist or an author being like, you know what, I really like Berserk so much, I want to use that kind of in my story, I see it as a form of respect. But anyways, let's actually get into what it's about. So, despite me obviously saying it's a bootleg Berserk, there's a lot more to it than that. There is so much more to the story than that, but it can basically be boiled down to this page, if we really wanted to boil it down to its main core motivation of what the character is fighting for. And that is the MC of the story, which is Bash. He is our main, orc character. He is a orc hero, someone that was a part of a war where all the different races in this world were fighting each other, elves, dwarves, etc. And, he is a survivor from that time, and he was basically the head of all of his fellow orcs, his warrior-like culture, and because of that, he never, for some reason, got the chance to actually get with anyone. And so basically, he's a virgin, just to be straight up with it. That's what he is. And in his culture, in his society, it's kind of weird. It's kind of frowned upon. And anyone, I'm not going to kind of dive into the nitty-gritty details. You can do that for yourself. You can read it for yourself as well. But orc culture can be pretty violent. Anyone that knows about mythology knows that. And, I mean, anyone that has, let's say, watched Goblin Slayer, if you've watched Goblin Slayer, or you have read Goblin Slayer, you definitely have seen probably the first episode, or the first chapter of the manga, and you know what the goblins do to certain, female characters within the story. That's basically what orcs do as well within this story, and it doesn't try to hide that. It doesn't try to act like that's a good thing or anything. It doesn't try to say this is fine. It's just saying this is orc culture. And the main male character, Bash, is someone that was born thanks to that, but he never got with anyone, and obviously thanks to the treaty, thanks to the war being done, he cannot do stuff like that anymore. And so he goes out of his way on an adventure to try to find someone that he can take as his wife, with consent and all. And it's very interesting just seeing this series like that. It's like, it tries to tell a narrative that seems stereotypical or very generic and a very unique approach, because typically with these stories, orcs would be instantly labeled as a villain, goblins would be labeled as a villain, and in this world they kind of are. But our main character is just someone that, is a part of that culture, but he hasn't participated in it. And he is someone that is just misunderstood, and he's trying to be better. He's in a world to be a better person and try to actually fulfill what he thinks would be to the right of his people and himself. It's very interesting. It's a very dark subject matter, and the story obviously doesn't try to shy away from that whatsoever, and it really does fit, like, for instance, the author of Mushoku Tensei's, overall themes with his other story, for instance, Mushoku Tensei, because it's like, he's good with writing narratives that at first glance might seem stereotypical or generic, and turning it into something that there's a lot more to it than just, looking at it and being like, that's it. There's just so much more going on with the story. And I think that the character in general, being this brutish individual, but being just like kind of a more softer kind individual, a kind-hearted person, makes me really like this story. Now, I want to be blunt here, at least from what I've read so far. I haven't read the light novel version of this, I might have to, but from the manga version that I have read, the story isn't anything ridiculously crazy. Like, if we're wanting to put it aside, for instance, Mushoku Tensei, and compare it to that writing, it is definitely not in the same ballpark. It doesn't even get close to just the quality of Mushoku Tensei. But, at the same time, we gotta look at this from a few different perspectives. This is obviously a series relatively new, with probably maybe a few manga volumes or a few, light novel volumes, while Mushoku Tensei has, 24, 25 volumes of content and years to develop. So, it's very apparent that, you can't fully compare the series, because there hasn't been enough time to really cook with this said story. But on top of that as well, I have read the manga version of this, and not the light novel version, and normally when it comes to light novel content adapted into manga content, the manga content is usually watered down and doesn't show everything and all the nuance and character details that you would get actually from the source material. So that is also something to consider as well. So the story could have a lot more going on with it, with its original source, than what I read with the manga. But at least from what I have read, if we're just talking about the manga, it is nothing ridiculously crazy. It's pretty much orc propaganda. That's what it is. It's basically trying to paint the orcs in a different light and trying to say that not all of them are these savage brutes and evil villains that just attack people indiscriminately. There's some that are very kind and can have compassionate souls within them. And I think that's a very interesting story concept. If it is developed and done right, it can really make for an interesting, engaging story. However, there is one thing I have found out recently thanks to discovery of this story, and that is the fact that apparently a lot of people are upset of the existence of Orc Eroica. And the reason for that is because thanks to this story existing is why a lot of people feel we don't have Mushoku Tensei sequel. Like, we don't have a sequel at all to that story, is because, Orc Eroica exists. And to be fair, it kind of makes sense why people would assume that. If the author is busy writing this work, obviously he's not going to dedicate time to another project as well. He's going to focus on one other thing. And so a lot of people think that this man goes from writing a very peak storytelling fantasy about, a coming of age, but also bettering yourself with your second life, and going straight into basically orc propaganda, the story. I can see why some would be a little bit upset with that, but at the same time, if we disregard his connection to his previous work, there's a lot of things to consider with Orc Eroica that could really be a fascinating story to tell. Because obviously, there's not many stories, I think, that focus on, orcs or goblins as much as they should. Obviously, most of the time, stories in this type of genre, dark fantasy, depict orcs and goblins as just these vile, evil creatures that need to be eradicated. And there's a few that come to mind. I mean, let's take a Goblin Slayer, but we also have Remonster that is kind of tries to be a little bit different. But, you have things like this. Those are two series that just come to mind that are in this type of genre of dark fantasy, or the subgenre, so to speak. And I think Orc, Eroica could be another one of those, but I feel like it could go even beyond that and do something relatively we haven't seen done before. Now, at this point in time, what I've read, most of it is low-hanging fruit, and it's just a pretty down-to-earth series of a guy trying to hunt after a wife. That's really all it is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that type of story, don't get me wrong. There's always a time and place for these type of manga and light novels, It is a fascinating 180 turn from his previous work, but I mean, I say let him cook. I'm not upset that this series exists. I think that, judging by his previous work, there's a possibility that this can be a cult classic. Give it a few years. I mean, it's going to be sad that we're not going to get a sequel series of Mushoku Tensei probably for a long time because of this. But I mean, I feel like the author was like, I'm a big fan of orcs. He's probably the type of guy that plays like Baldur's Gate or something and picks an orc, or he plays Skyrim and he picks an orc. And he's like, I like orcs. I like elves. I mean, look what he did with Sylphie and Mushoku Tensei, and he decided to pair these two type of, characters together, and that's how we got Orc Eroica. But, not a bad series. I'm definitely going to keep my eye on it. I feel like, judging by how the climate is for anime in general, give or take a few years, I can definitely see this getting an anime adaptation. It's bound to happen, because as much as this series might come off as raunchy or risque, I think that it's not necessarily that, like, I guess raunchy. Like, it's just the only context, I guess, that would be is just what orcs do, or goblins, etc. But besides that, it's relatively tame. But once again, I feel like why the series looks like it does is because of, the H artist. That's why it is. But, yeah. Anyways, I'll wrap up the video there. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in this story, do give it a read. Let me know how you guys feel about it. But, be safe, stay healthy, everyone. I love you guys. Chibi out.